Go.
Hi, this is Lance Johnson again from Rio Fire Jewelers at riofire.com or on Etsy at Rio Fire as well. Today I wanted to show you how to make a simple bezel ring with a split shank or a single shank. And so I picked 3 stones that I thought would be fun to work with today to show you this process. So these are the 3 stones that I've chosen. What we're going to do first is decide how much silver we need for each stone. For those of you who like to saw them out, that's one way to do it. I'm just going to cut these with the shears today because I find it to be a quicker way to do that. I'm going to take these 3 pieces of silver now because they do have sharp edges on, and I want to just flatten them out. That should work good there. So I've got my 3 pieces. The first thing I want to do is make a bezel for each one of these. And this seems to be the trickiest part for a lot of people. I'll show you how I do it. Everybody seems to have their own way. I like to put my bezel on one of the longest sides possible rather than up here on an end where it's more curved. I like to start them at a side, put it on a flat surface, and just wrap it around to get the right size. Whatever device you want to use to mark that with, I use an X-Acto knife, which works really well for me. And I try and cut it as straight as possible with my shears. So there's one. So we'll do this one first. I want to make sure that those are nice and even. So I'll use some flat sharp pliers and kind of straighten those out a little bit. Then I want to push it in like this so that it overlaps quite far, and then I can pull it out and put it together, and it'll have spring tension. If it's not still sitting quite the way I like it, I can flatten it out a little bit, tweak it just a little bit so it has a nice seam that's all matched together. Does that look, are you getting a good enough?
Yeah, let me see that.
So the tension's holding it together. If you didn't get the cut quite straight, you can straighten it up with a little file. I like to use my Fordham and use this diamond covered wheel, and I can get the edges really straight and nice to do that with. This is a piece of hard solder that I use. I've had this piece for a long time, that's why it's all black, and this piece will last me for a long time, and I do a lot of rings. So I'm just going to cut a little snippet. Not very big at all. I like to put it up here in my tweezers with the seam on the bottom side. I put a little flux on there. Make sure that the area that you want to solder on is covered, and that will work plenty. I don't need a lot of heat to take care of this this solder here, and I don't want to get it too hot and melt my bezel as I'm doing it. So I'm just going to heat that up until that flux bubbles off and it has a nice clean silver finish. Then I'm going to set my piece of solder right on that seam, right in the middle. Oops, fell off. Don't breathe while you do this. Don't shake like me. That's why it's nice to have a lap tray so that you don't lose them every time. People are watching me, I'm nervous. Dang it. We'll have to edit that out, won't we?
Yeah.
Can't make mistakes. There. Now all I gotta do is just have a light flame. And have flowed and filled in that seam. If your solder flowed on one side of the seam or the other, I take my pick like this, and once it's hot and flowing, I can drag that solder into that seam and it will fill it up. So now that it's soldered, we're in good shape. I put it in my acid first. Then I rinse it off in just regular water. Then I can take my stone and press the bezel down on it. If you have a push tool like this, a roller, it's nice to go around it and just straighten it up really nice. On this particular stone, because it's a perfect oval, it's not an issue. But suppose I have a different shaped stone like this, I've got to make sure that I don't get my bezel upside down. I have to keep it the same way as I go. One of the things that works really well for me is I can take a piece of flat or a piece of sandpaper, a fine sandpaper, hold it down and just sand it back and forth. Nobody's going to see the bottom of the stone, so it's not an issue if you get a few scratches on there. But I want to file it down so that I have a nice smooth surface on the back side of the bezel. Then I'm going to push my stone up through the top of the bezel without bending the shape or losing the shape that I have. So this is about the only place that I use my tripod, and I like to use that for this particular process. I'll just cover that with flux. Put that in place. And I want to center it because I'm going to put a decorative either rope or some kind of a decoration around it. If you know your design that you're going to do beforehand, give yourself enough silver on the outside to fit the decoration in there that you want to put. So let's solder this part. So I'm going to heat it from the underneath side, and I want to heat the piece evenly. It'll foam up again and clear off to a nice, clean, bright kind of silver. I'm going to show you an easy way if you're beginning to do this that will help you out, I think. This is my silver solder, my easy flow. I'm going to cut about 3 little snippets, and I'm going to drop them on the inside of the bezel. I'm just going to take my tweezers or any other push tool, and I'm going to push them up against the edge of the bezel. This is a good way to learn. I'll teach you stick soldering in a few minutes. I'll do the same thing and just evenly heat my piece from the underneath side. If I heat from the underneath side and I watch carefully, I don't have a chance of melting my bezel, which is a common thing. There it flowed right there. So it flowed all the way around, it sealed it all up. If I didn't have any spots that it filled in because the bezel was not smooth, I always have an old file that I use, and I can just heat it up and gently press it down into place and then heat it and the solder will flow into place. As you go through each step, if you get a lot of fire scale on it as you're doing it, you can let it sit in the acid for a few minutes till that's all cleaned off. But this is pretty good right here. Any little bits I can just kind of wipe off with my finger. This is some 20 gauge wire, just sterling wire. And I'm going to show you how to make some twisted wire. I take the two ends, I double it over so I have a hook on the end there, or a loop. I made me just a little hook out of a old used piece of wire or whatever. It's got to be pretty strong. find some pliers these are the ones I use. You can use whatever as long as you can hold it really strong, or you can put it in a vise and hold it that way. I hook my loop through the other end and just spin it up. Be careful not to go too far. There I have a nice piece of twisted rope wire. I'm going to snip off this end, and then I can file it so it has a very nice smooth end. What I want to do at this point is attach this wire to the side of the bezel. So I soldered it on this side with the hard solder. And the reason you put the hard solder on the bezel is that if you had easy flow on the bezel as well as down here, as soon as you heat that up, that solder in your seam on your bezel will just flow down in and leave an open gap there. And you'll see that sometimes on pieces of jewelry, and they just didn't take the time to use a hard solder to do that. So I can probably just rub it back and forth like this and draw out enough solder to attach this, but I'm going to probably just add a little bit of solder right here. That'll make it easier because I'm not going to have any design on the outside of my wire anyway. This is my soldering brick that I've had for years, and I have embedded 2 nails in there that I've had forever, and I'll show you how I use those in just a minute. But let's put a little more flux on there. I'm going to heat it up evenly again. And I just flowed a little solder along the edge of that bezel. Now I'll take my wire and I soldered it in place. Oops. Let's see if we can, there. It's right up against the edge. Now quench it in the acid, in the water, and I can just wrap the wire around to figure out how big of a piece I need. I use these shears a lot on these. Some people will just wrap their wire around there, figure out what it is, solder the wire together, and then drop it down over there. I like this method because I can get the wire very tight up against the bezel and have a really clean look. So now I've got to get this wire to sit up against the bezel where I want it. That's where my nails come in. So I'm just going to push it up into place and hold it there